All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Latinx Kidlit Book Festival. You are all listening to the panel devoted to growing pains, coming of age, and emotional storytelling. My name is Angela Velez, and I'm the author of LULU and MILAGRO'S Search for Clarity. And before we start, please take a minute to read our anti-harassment policy in the chat box. Meanwhile, I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone on our panel. So first up, we have Aya de Leon. Aya, you want to give a wave? Yeah. Aya de Leon is an award-winning author of Puerto Rican, African-American, and West Indian heritage. She teaches creative writing at UC Berkeley, and Kensington Books publishes her novels for adults, including Justice Hustler series, which has been optioned for TV. Undercover Latina is her first novel for young readers. And next up, we have Jennifer Matthieu, who's the author of Devoted, Afterward, The Liars of Mariposa Island, and The Truth About Alice, the winner of the Children's Choice Teen Debut Author Award. Her 2017 novel, Moxie, is being developed into a film by Amy Poehler for Netflix. Jennifer teaches high school English in Texas, where she lives in the Houston area with her husband and son. Next up, we have Nikki Barthelmess. And Nikki is an author of young adult books, including Everything Within and In Between, The Quiet You Carry, and Quiet No More. While growing up in foster care, Nikki found solace in books and writing. A former journalist, Nikki lives in sunny Santa Barbara with her husband, daughter, and a diva of a corgi. Michelle Ruiz Keil is here too. And she is a writer and tarot reader with an eye for the enchanted and a way with animals. Her critically acclaimed debut novel, All of Us with Wings, called A Transcendent Journey by the New York Times, and a fantastical ode to the Golden City's post-punk era by Entertainment Weekly, was released from Soho Teen in 2019. Next, we have Laura Taylor Namey, who's a New York Times bestselling author of Reese Witherspoon's YA book club pick, A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow, as well as The Library of Lost Things and When We Were Them. A proud Cuban American, she lives in San Diego with her husband and 2 children. And I'm Angela Velez, your moderator. Angela grew up in Baltimore under the watchful eye of her Peruvian immigrant parents. She has a BA from Columbia University and an MFA from the University of Pittsburgh. Angela lives in Pittsburgh with her piles of books, 3 plastic flamingos, and 1 wobbly disco ball. So to start off, can everyone tell us a little bit about your book? And Aya, why don't you go ahead and go first?
Sure. My debut novel is Undercover Latina, about Andrea, who is in her first year in high school, but she's been homeschooled. However, this is her first solo mission as a teen spy, and she's going to go undercover. The big twist for her when she gets her assignment is that she's a relatively light-skinned Latina, and she needs to press her hair and pass for white to befriend the estranged son of a white nationalist terrorist who's planning an attack.
Wow. That sounds incredible. Nikki, why don't you tell us about your book?
My book is Everything Within and In Between. And it is about Ree Fernandez, who is mixed and Latinx, and she's bicultural. So she has light skin and is trying to connect with her heritage by learning Spanish and reconnecting with her absent mom, all while keeping it secret from her strict immigrant grandmother, who has kept her from all of the things for many reasons that we find out, but related to wanting to assimilate.
Cool. And it just came out a few weeks ago, right?
Yes, it came out October 5th.
Yay. All right, Michelle, tell us about your book.
So my book that I want to talk about today, actually, or just that I'm writing now is my second book, Summer in the City of Roses. It came out in July, and it is a retelling mashup of the Grimm story Brother and Sister, which is kind of a Hansel and Gretel type of story, and Greek myths about siblings Iphigenia and Orestes. And it's set in early 90s Portland in the riot girl scene.
Great. Laura, will you tell us about your newest book?
Yes, this is When We Were Them, and it's my first friendship center book. And it tells the story of three best friends, Willa, Luz, and Britton. And it is told in two timelines, with the first time being the graduation week, where Luz, Britton has found out that Willa has betrayed Luz and tried to hide it for months and months. And the story follows them over 10 years in the past timeline and alternates with the week of graduation, where Willa is tasked to come to terms with and be honest about what she's really done and give the real reason which she has blocked. So When We Were Them is three girls, 10 years, and one moment of betrayal. And can these friends survive?
Great. And Jennifer, tell us about your book.
Hello, everybody. My latest is Bad Girls Never Say Die. It's about a young woman named Evie Barnes, and her best friends, Connie, Sunny, and Juanita. It's set in Houston, 1964. It's a gender-flipped feminist reimagining of The Outsiders. And Evie and her friends live on the east side of town. They're, thought to be bad girls. And there's one fateful night where Evie's life is saved by a girl named Diane from the right side of the tracks, from the River Oaks neighborhood here in Houston. And, Evie had been suspicious of these girls from River Oaks, but once Diane comes to her rescue, it sets these two girls and their friends off on an odyssey. There's running away and murder and hiding out. And I had a lot of fun writing it. This is Bad Girls Never Say Die.
That's so cool. And I love that we have some retelling on this panel. We have some heist and kind of undercoverness. We've got some contemporary stories, which includes my debut novel, which is out in February. I'm very excited. It is a road trip novel following two sisters, LULU and Milagro. It's their search for clarity as they uncover family secrets, kind of reveal secret ambitions of their own, and kind of develop new ideas of who they could become as they cross the country with an all-boys high school and an all-girls high school and get into a lot of trouble along the way. So I'm very excited. But I'm also excited to talk about why we are driven to write coming-of-age stories for teens and what excites you about writing these stories. And so I don't know, Michelle, do you want to start us off about what it is about YA?
For me, coming of age stories are something that I love and that I'm really drawn to. Whether they're YA stories or adult, I think that they live in that kind of place where we can all relate to that moment in time where everything changes in our life. And so I think that also I have a theater background, and so I'm drawn to those moments of sort of dramatic tension. And I think that, that's kind of a perfect one where you change from the person you were into the person that you're really going to be. So it's like a lot of the stories that we're hearing about, like, reveal secrets, take another look at the past and so that we can move on into the present. So I think that's another reason why I love these stories, because I do think they're universal. We all, even as adults, we keep growing and changing. And, I think it's really great to look at those moments of change that can be really transformative for readers. And also, like I said, just lots of drama, lots of excitement to write about. And I also think it's, I write magical realism, and it's a very potent magical time. Those transition times often hold the most magic, early morning, twilight, and those moments when we're about to become someone else. So I'm drawn to it for that reason as well.
Yeah, and I know for me, a big part of that tension, or I think about those twilight moments, is this kind of uncertainty that exists during this era. And I'm drawn to these characters. I think to be a teen, to be a young adult requires so much bravery, because you have so little control over the systems around you. And oftentimes you're realizing that these systems are maybe not serving you best. And what are you going to do about it? And whether that's kind of like sneaking out and getting your first kiss, or like dismantling a totalitarian government, you're doing these tremendous, huge acts of bravery. And that is like so exciting to write. And I find it really inspiring. And I guess I'm like kind of trying to hold on to little pieces of that in my own life. I see you nodding along too. What do you think?
Well, I also just love this piece around coming of age, and particularly, coming of agency. I think that's part of what I'm excited about too. And I think, we're writing, a lot of us, about girls and women, right? And so there's just like girl, quiet, contained, and there's this sort of busting out. And I think, for me, with my particular protagonist, there are two things that I find interesting. Like, as I have this sort of spy family, right? And so part of what kids do in a spy family is they make they're the parents' cover, right? Because 4 people moving around don't look like a spy. And so this is the shift from the girl being part of her parents' cover to actually being an agent and having a kind of agency, which is really interesting in terms of political coming of age, right? These are your parents' values and this is what they're fighting for, but you decide that you want to fight for something. But I also think that coming of age is very interesting in terms of looking at race and racism. And so, people are talking a lot about race in the Latina community, as well we should, right? And there's this sense of like, what does it mean to be white passing? But I think it's also really important to look at what it means to be white passing if you're coming out of a childhood where your family isn't white passing. Because it's not like people are born, looking white and everyone's like, okay, congratulations, you're white, have a nice white life. That actually the racism that affects your family affects you in a particular way. And then as you move around as an adult, independent from your family, that doesn't necessarily look like what your early childhood life looked like. So I have the protagonist is also coming to terms with race in terms of what it means to move more independently from her family. So I feel like coming of age is rich in so many ways.
Yeah, and those are themes, Nikki, I think that kind of overlap with where your characters are starting and kind of where they are emotionally. I don't know. Do you want to talk a little bit about?
I was like, you're speaking to me. You're speaking to me and to Ree. Yeah, so I completely agree. I couldn't agree more that like you grow up, or at least in my book and even in my life, growing up around people who have they walk around the world differently than you do because of how the world treats them and because of how they look, and that's your family. And then when you're with them, you might have a certain experience, and when you're not with them, you have a different one. And then and I definitely experience that personally, and my character definitely does, and that's where a lot of the inspiration came from. So exactly, this is the time when if you're coming of age, when you're a teenager, this is the time when you're going to start really grappling with that. When you're younger, it might be kind of confusing and you might not get it, and that's the time when you decide. And the kind of big struggle within my book is Ree, my main character, Maria Fernandez, is being told by her family, this is who you are, you're white, because of all the reasons, all the racism they've experienced and the life that they want her to have. And then she has people in her life, like her friends, her white friends, thinking that she's a certain way, and her kind of deciding like, who am I going to be? Who gets to decide who I am? And so it is 100% a coming of age story. So I was like nodding along, like, yes, I hear you. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jennifer, I'd love to hear more about like where your characters are starting out from and kind of whether that was also drawn from your own personal experience as well.
Well, I teach at the largest public high school and the most diverse public high school in Houston, which is one of the most diverse cities in the United States. And I'm in my 17th year in the classroom. I teach teenagers every day. I'm around them every day. And I don't base my books on them. They're like, is this about me, miss? I'm like, no, it's not about you. But I think being around the rhythm of adolescence every day inspires me because I know And I'm a big believer in choice reading in my classroom. So we have independent reading time. We have a classroom library where I have books that, you know, a wide representation of experiences so that these books can be windows and mirrors for these kiddos. And I just see how much reading young adult fiction helps not only them grow as readers. If I'm going to be an English teacher, it really does, right? When we read books that we choose, that we connect with, that are on our reading level, comfort level, whatever it is, we grow as readers. But I think also, you know, I think teenagers are like adults in the sense that they just want a good story too, right? They want interesting characters. They want a plot that they can't let go of. And so, you know, just being around my reader base every day is what keeps me going, because I know how much they crave and respond to these stories. So I'm really fortunate to have the two best jobs in the world, which is to teach young people and write for them too.
That's great. And Laura, for you, I know you're juggling 3 friends. So where are your 3 characters when you start out with the book? And are you drawing from your own experience and developing 3 strong voices?
Well, this book is set in my hometown, so it's kind of a love letter to my little hometown neighborhood of Crown Point, which is just heavily beach and bay influenced. And when you meet the characters, like I said, they're getting ready to go off on their own and graduate. It's just that week before graduation when you're doing all the things, the rehearsals and the banquets, and you're clinging to your friends and to those last moments. And for, you know, Willa, for my character, she's just been outed. And it's not the best week for her because she's tasked then to go off by herself and try to repair this friendship of her life. And this is the ride or die friendship. And when we see, you know, these girls, they really are coming of age, and we see them then as we toggle back into the past, starting when they're 15. And even in flashback, going back to when they're 7 and 8 years old, and all the things they've been through in this tiny little community that grew them, and how they grew one another. And for me, I did put a lot of my coming of age, a lot of my Latina culture, my Cubana self is in here. Luz is Cuban American, like me, and grew up on my street. So I did infuse a lot of the things that I saw and a lot of the things that are part of my family and aren't. And I had fun also in this book remembering my coming of age, and also just being a creative person who can come up with new fun things and adding those cultural elements plus my memories of friendship into a completely different thing. Like I would never do what Willa does in this book. That's not of me, but I wrote it and it was really fun to write something a little more sinister and a little edgy. A lot edgier than I was. I'm a boring beach girl. So yeah, anyway, the spoiler, but yeah, she does a bad thing. Yeah. And I have to see. What does she do?
Yeah. And I like that tension of that week of like looking forward, but also wanting to hold on to.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. This is what this is about, you know, how can I let go of them? You know, how do we let go? How do we go to the great beyond? And what is that for teens, for 18-year-olds? It's scary. I have a daughter who's a senior, and this is her. She's Willa, and she's Luz and Britton this year, and she's doing all the last things. So yeah.
Yeah. And I think so in my book, Luz, well, I also have a Luz. She goes by Lulu.
Yay. I love it.
And Milagro, they are both kind of like, can we skip to the good part? Can we get to that graduation week? Like Lulu has this idea, I want to go get my PhD. I'm going to move across the country. And Milagros, like, I got to lose my virginity. I'm ready. And secretly underneath it, there is a lot of fear about what will my family say, and what will, both about like my, you know, sex choices, and also about my academic choices. And a lot of that was kind of grounded in like being raised in a very Catholic household for me. And I like really drew on that. And also these kind of ideas of like, really like that strong families stay together. And why would you leave the state to go to another college when there are perfectly nice colleges close by? And I think that's something that a lot of students are having conversations with their families. As senior year comes around and you're looking, you're going to a college fair, you're getting all these brochures in the mail, and you're like, could this be for me? And is this open for me or not? And I find that, I don't know, I think that's such a cool, exciting age. For your characters, what kind of outlets do they turn to when they are kind of at the peak emotions, things are intense, the world around them maybe feels like it's collapsing? I don't know, Michelle, what happens for your characters?
Well, with my story, I wanted to explore a little bit what it's like to come of age when you've had kind of a different experience from most of your peers. So, in the family that I'm writing about, there is a very sensitive older sister and a neurodivergent younger brother, and the family has become very close because the sort of outside coming of age and sort of normal milestones of childhood and teenagehood haven't really been available to them because they just haven't been a fit. So as a result, the family got very close. The younger brother homeschools, and I wanted to explore that. That's somewhat similar to my own family with the kids I've raised, and I wondered, what would it be like to explore that in kind of a magical realist way, what it's like to come of age outside of this very different, very insular world. And so when my characters are suddenly thrust into the world on their own, which they are, the story begins with the mother going away to an artist residency and the father in the story deciding to take matters into his own hands, which he has not done in the family up to then, and making a choice to send the younger son to a wilderness boot camp, which ends up being a really big mistake and a terrible fit for the son. And the daughter is not told until the deed is already done. So she's furious. My main character, If, is just like basically runs away from her dad and tries to find her brother. The brother escapes from the boot camp, and both of them are sort of actually very close to one another in Southeast Portland, trying to find one another, but also finding themselves. And I was thinking about, in those moments of heightened emotion in the beginning of the story, they always refer back to their family, the things that happened in their family, to their mother's history, which she won't tell them much about, but they know is really painful. Back to sort of the things that that their family have done or said. It's all very referenced into the family, but as the story moves on, they begin to sort of look at their world through their own lens. And so, yeah, I thought that moment, that transition was really interesting to me when I began to find myself saying, what is this character going to do? There is no family context for this. There is no experience they've had in their childhood that they can refer back to. And they start to reach for really the things that make them unique people, that will bring them into their adulthood. For the brother, it's his music and his difference. And for the sister, it's her love of theater and her way of seeing the world through that lens of art and performance. And using the intuition that really makes her good at that. So it was an interesting discovery. As a writer, sometimes I really don't know what they're going to do. And so that was an interesting discovery for me.
And I love this theater because I know for your characters, like for If, she starts off like with her mother's sweater and then transitions into these incredible outfits and you really see her growth. Like there's like some really spectacular looks there, but you can kind of see like, oh, she's like looking to her mother, like literally holding on to it and then finding all these different outfits.
Yeah, and kind of putting on outfits actually that belonged to the grandmother of this person she has a crush on. She's sort of left, without any clothes, and in putting on these other clothes of this other person who does happen to be a person with a really different context from her and a very independent woman. It's funny that you picked up on that, because secretly I was like, Nana's clothes are they're helping her. It's like a little secret special guardian angel friend that is like helping her be brave in her new life.
Yeah, no, I love that. I loved that a lot. Nikki, what about you?
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. So for your characters, what kind of outlets, like how is this when the emotions are kind of peaking and things are feeling overwhelming, like what do they turn to? Whether it's an activity like running or it's kind of looking to family.
My main character, Ree, does go jogging to deal with she like tries to run it out of her system if she's really upset. And She also likes to write in her journal. She does both that. And then the other characters in the book, I'm thinking about it, and they all kind of have creative outlets. So there's a character who's a photographer, and there's a character who's likes to paint. So I think that, I don't know that I did this on purpose, but they all kind of go to their art to let out their feelings and emotions, which I think is a very healthy thing to do.
Yeah. And I'm curious, what do you do when you're undercover and you need to let off some steam or you're feeling like emotional? What are your options, Aya?
That's hilarious. Well, I think, one of the things that I didn't really realize until later about my spy characters, I have these two girl protagonists, a Latina girl and a Black girl, and I put them both in these really functional families. So they have these great, intact families of people of color who love each other and are really nice to each other, and they homeschool their kids so they're not traumatized in schools, and they fight for the cause. And it wasn't until later I realized oh, wow, this is very different from my adult fiction, very different from my own life. So I think, part of what I'm creating is a world in which the real problems we have, like racism and terrorism, are contained in a more, not quite cartoonish villain, but are contained in a more, in a simpler situation, right? So, and these books are kind of middle grade, young adult, so they don't have that level of real complexity, because I think, part of the issue with emotions that young people, and hey, let's be real, adults, are dealing with has to do with what happens when we get triggered based on early trauma. And so I think that the kinds of coping mechanisms that adults and young people really need is figuring out how to manage those huge emotions that come up in some present time situation that's triggering old stuff, plus maybe a situation that's hard in and of itself. So I think there's a way that I've sort of skated on top of that. But speaking of skating, I will say Andrea is a skateboarder, and so that's one of her things, But I think that one of the keys to managing big emotions is having some understanding of what is the impact of trauma. And I think that that's what these more emotionally deep YA books help, tell a story of a young person coming through that who has a trauma history as well.
Yeah. And for Jennifer, for your books, thinking about that trauma, thinking about how, I think you mentioned the right track, the wrong track, how does that affect your characters kind of finding outlets or kind of developing ways to let that emotion out?
So something that I am exploring in Bad Girls Never Say Die is, what does it mean to be a bad girl, right? And so the characters in this book they act bad in some very sort of overt 1960s sort of fun, stereotypical ways. They're the girls that wear a lot of eye makeup, and they cut class, and they hang out with boys, and and that's fun, and that's the early 60s, and that's I had a blast writing that part. But they also act bad in ways that signal to the world that they're living in that they're not going to be put into these boxes, and they're refusing to live within these parameters that the culture is putting on them. So an example would be, it's a tiny bit of a spoiler, but it was a very fun scene to write. I interviewed all sorts of folks from in their 70s who grew up here in Houston from all walks of life. And that was so much fun. This was pre-COVID. So I went on all these dinner dates with, senior citizens. But I interviewed a lot of folks of Mexican heritage because this was especially true in the early 60s. Most of the folks of Latin background were Mexican. And they shared with me that when they were in school, and this is interesting, the white power structure, they classified people of Mexican heritage as legally white, and then placed them in school with white students, and then Black students had their own school system. And then when Texas was forced to integrate its schools, Houston said, okay, well, we'll send all the Mexican students to the school with the Black students, and then we've technically integrated, because the Mexicans are classified as legally white. It's so screwed up. But one of the things that I learned from my interviews is how many of these young people, when they were young, teachers refused to call these. refused to call them by their Spanish name. So, Jorge would become George, and, Juanita would become Joni. And so the character of Juanita in this book has a very fun scene where she decides to be bad by refusing to allow a teacher to call her by the wrong name. And she acts out in that way. And she's considered a bad girl for doing that. But ultimately, I would argue she's doing exactly what she needs to do. So that is a big, that outlet, I think, is these girls are being bad because they demand to be treated like full human beings. So that's their outlet.
That's really incredible. And I love this idea of drawing on oral history for creating a narrative, and also turning to like older adults to craft younger characters. I think there's a really beautiful kind of intergenerational synergy that's happening there.
It was so fun. I'm telling you. I mean, my editor was like, you have to start writing this book. You can't just keep going out to dinner with, these people and talking about high school.
Yeah. And Laura, I have to say, this question was really inspired by Lila in Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow, because I just remember whenever things got tough, she'd go for a run, and it was just like so relieving for her. And when I finished reading your book, I was like, wow, I really should go for more runs. And so I'm curious for your characters, like, what are they doing when things are getting intense?
One of the most fun things I had writing when we were them was my characters have their own language code and code of conduct and handbook that they have developed in 10 years of being friends. When you're 7 years old up until when you're 18, you learn what each other needs when you're in crisis. And that could be anything from from huge tragedies that I'm sorry, but yes, that do happen in this book, to the small things like broken hearts and failed tests and disappointments. So there's the thing they eat. Luz brings Rubio's fish tacos, and Willa is in heartbreak because the boy doesn't ask her to the dance. That's what they eat when there's heartbreak. We get fish tacos, like we just do. We go to our spot on the beach that no one takes because they know it's our spot. No one sits there but us. It's the same plot of sand. And I think having those things we eat, the songs we play, the places we go helps channel. And it's a place for me to filter and funnel and illustrate emotional highs and lows. And there are a million of them in this story. It's probably my most tough emotional piece I have ever crafted. And there's a lot of big, heavy, hard, and beautiful emotions that are bouncing back and forth between these three girls and their peripherals. And I needed a place to channel all of that and to reconcile all of it. And I use my city and the things that I grew up on, the soft serve ice cream I ate, and the hamburger place that is on the Food Network that everybody lines up for, and the bridge that everybody wants to jump off of. All of those landmarks, I think, really helped me in illustrating emotion. So, yeah.
And I think,
and I'm sorry for the pain.
Yeah, I think
a little bit.
Yeah,
you're not sorry.
A little bit sorry. I know Nikki's read it. I should be sorry. I should be more sorry than I am. Probably.
She's not sorry.
I think a lot about how, often turning to other people, whether it's our friends or our family, is also a source of comfort in these big times. And I know for Lulu and Milagro, when they start out, their source of comfort, Lulu's like, I'm just going to put like National Geographic podcast, or I'm just going to disappear into a book. And it's so solitary. And Milagro has her best friend, but doesn't, like, even though they are in each other's orbits, they share a room, they go to the same school, they're not necessarily relying on each other. And a big part of when they reach these huge emotional feelings is realizing, like, oh, I actually can turn to my sister, and she's there. She can be there for me and can be this resource for me. And so that was really fun to track that kind of emotional journey. And so, like, finding the strength for yourself, but also the strength to ask others for help and to be vulnerable with the people that you are so close to. In some ways, it's almost harder to open up to them because they have these expectations of you. But I think I'm also curious, what is one, like, kind of message that you have for young readers who are experiencing these big emotions for the first time? Michelle, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure. I think I really love this question because I've been thinking about it a lot. And one thing I started doing as a youth was I'm a tarot reader. I put that in my bio. It's been a huge part of my creative process and my life. I came to the cards at 16, and I also began to use the I Ching not much later. And those kinds of so I was a very emotional teenager, and I'm a very emotional adult. So intensity runs in my family. I feel like it got triple concentrated in both of my daughters. So I feel like it's something I think about and work with all the time. So to understand that working with emotions is actually going to be a lifelong skill that you're going to need to develop, and that will change over time as the challenges change. But what that moment does for me, and really it doesn't have to be the tarot cards, it can be any moment that you can take that causes you to make a pause, to sit down, to take a deep breath, and to find a way to look a little differently at the emotion that you're having. So the images in the cards make me think about, why am I feeling this way? What happened? Because oftentimes when those emotions come, you don't even know why they're there or what they mean. And so I think that delving kind of into the meaning of those things, and for me, I'm also very interested in psychology. So I began to read a lot about psychology even around the time that I started using the tarot, and figuring out what made me tick was really important. And also something like theater or writing, where you can both have an outlet for those emotions, but also to see how emotion really has fueled stories. Reading, the same thing, getting that perspective that emotion is a part of a story, but it's not everything. It's that it is a part of a story, but in a story, every story that has big emotion, there's that rise, and then there's that eventual fall. So to know too that you're having a big emotion right now, but that emotion will pass, just like a big wave seems to go up and up and up and up, but it finally has to come falling down. And I think it's hard to know that. If you've never been in that wave before, how do you know it's ever going to come down? So also just maybe ask someone who's been there, even someone who's even a few years older than you, like can say, yeah, this happens, but then something else happens and something else.
Yeah. So that it's cyclical, but also like there's a break,
that there's a break. And that one other really great piece of advice I've gotten recently is to think about emotion and dealing with big emotions as a pendulum. So you swing over here and you deal with the emotion, and you really feel it. You let yourself cry, you let yourself express it, but you can't stay there forever or for too long. And so you'll notice when you're having a really emotional conversation with your friend, suddenly someone's making a really inappropriate joke and you're cracking up or whatever. And it's like, it's because we need that. We deal with it for a minute, and then we swing back over here and we let life be funny again, or we go have fish tacos, we go take a walk, we watch dumb TV, whatever it is, that we can't always be in the emotion all the time either. And that's natural. That's fine. I used to kind of tell myself, oh, I shouldn't check out, or whatever. I should deal with the emotion. But I think that even, a lot of research now has shown that actually with our nervous systems, that's what we need. Feel the big thing and then let yourself laugh at something ridiculous, and that's all good.
And I think that that's so key, that balance, right? Because I think that people will tend in one direction or the other. And I think that that's a skill that young people need to learn. Like people will either tend towards like every little emotion, like, this is, it's killing me. Oh my, and they're just like always in it and they don't know how to get out. Or there are folks who are always running from it and don't know how to have the experience. And I think, because I love what you were saying about it's like a wave. And really what happens in the nervous system is like you have a big swell of emotion. And if you let yourself really have the moment, right, and have the good cry and let it wash over you, and don't try and stuff it, like, I teach, right, and students will like start crying, because we deal with heavy things in the class, and then they're like, I'm sorry, and you see them trying to tuck it in, right? And it's a class, it's not a therapy session. But part of the problem is, like, if you don't let yourself go through the full cycle of letting it out, your nervous system doesn't reset. and you stay agitated because the feeling's trying to come out. And I think that that's part of what young people need to learn and need to build for themselves. Like, who are the safe people that you can have that big cry with? This isn't true for all young people. Some folks have different vulnerabilities, etc., or get triggered or could be unsafe. But I think ultimately we need to create those containers where we can let ourselves break all the way down and then come back from it.
Yeah, as a high school teacher, for almost 20 years now, year 17, as I mentioned, I love this advice, and I think it really it resonates. Like, one thing I try not to do very often that I think some well-meaning adults do, is I try not to say, hang in there, it'll get better. Because when you're 44, 1 year of your life is nothing, right? A year, whatever, 12 months. But when you're 16, a year or even 6 months feels like forever, because time is relative, right? So, and this, for example, this pandemic, like 2 years of my life, okay, I can adjust and maintain and figure that out. But for these kiddos, 2 years of their lives, it's a lot. And in the crucible of adolescence, right? So one thing I'm very careful to never say, I will talk about, because I actually, as a teenager, dealt a lot with depression and anxiety that was very well masked, and I should have gotten more help that I didn't ask for. So I do share with my kids, like, it does get better. Like, high school was really rough for me, but I also try to make my advice very now centered, and finding a creative outlet, finding a healthy outlet, finding your safe people, as I was saying, that is, trying to find now strategies. For a lot of our students, I begin every class period with a journal, with journal entering, and I don't read it. I say every 6 weeks, I walk around, I see you have it, 100 in my grade book, I'm never going to read it. So having to free write is a real outlet for a lot of them. So I recommend that quite a bit.
I have so little to add, because these are like, that was my answer, and then Michelle had my answer, and then I want to say, find books that model someone going through maybe something that you're going through, and ask adults, teachers, librarians, hey, what's a good YA book or middle grade for someone going through this, and read other stories. And I think it helps kids not feel so alone. And this is why we write these books. We model and we illustrate and illuminate in storytelling hope and a way through and a path through. So that's my little tidbit, because everything is so good. These are great tips.
Yeah. And I think I think these are all such great tips for students, but we also have some very real questions from students that we should definitely get to. So here is our first question from Amaya W., who's 9th grader in New York, New York.
How do you write emotions in a scene if you're not feeling the emotion you're writing at the time that you're writing the scene?
All right. So I think we can just quickly head into it. I was thinking, Laura, you were apologizing for all those emotions. So maybe
yeah.
Stop.
I really get immersed in my storytelling when I'm writing. I'm there, and it's almost like an actor putting on a character and having to cry on command. So if I'm writing a scene and it's not something I've been through, or I'm not sad, or I'm not as happy as Luz or Willa is in that scene, I find that I can just go there because it's my job to go there and to immerse myself in one. And I usually go back and read a little bit of what I've written to kind of orient myself and my emotions. And I find that I've been doing this for a while, and it doesn't take me that long. And I can then just place myself into that scene, and then I can go from there, and I start to emote with these characters, and I feel what they're feeling pretty quickly, and I can do that. I use memory. A lot of times I use a combination of just creativity and memory and my own agency, just as an author, in just wanting to be my best on the page and wanting to impart and tell you my story and show the hearts and minds and souls of my characters. And that for me is usually enough to hopefully, at least in a first draft, and then I revise everything and erase it all and redo it. But that's just writing.
Yeah. Does anyone else have any tips for writing this emotion in a scene?
I listen to music. I listen to music. That's it. I listen to music. That's it. I'll listen to the same song on repeat over and over again. That's my quick tip.
I was just going to agree with Laura, but saying that for the people asking this question, maybe they don't know how to do that. Like, we know how to do that because that's our job and we're good at that because we're emotive. I don't think I've ever met an author who's not really sensitive and empathetic. But if that's not your strong suit and you want it to be, I would just try to. And we're always talking about in terms of having empathy and understanding for other people, regardless of writing, but why it's a good thing to be a better citizen of the world, is try to imagine how you would feel if you were in that circumstance. So obviously we don't all have the same circumstances. And if you're a writer, if you're a young writer in high school, I think 9th grade, it says, then maybe you haven't gone through the thing that you're writing about or imagining, but imagine what it would feel like if you did. And then imagine what it would feel like if your friend went through that, or does anyone you love, have they ever felt that emotion? How did that make you feel? And so I think thinking of it that way, if you haven't, because I do it exactly how Laura does it too, but if I'm trying to think of what I would tell someone who doesn't come to it naturally, like so many of us writers do, and that's where I would suggest they start.
Yeah. I know one thing I really advise young writers to do is take a drama class, because I feel like again and again, I go back to that theater training, and there's something really, really simple you can start with. And that is, imagine the scene that you want to write about. Imagine the emotion, like kind of maybe close your eyes for a minute and let it play like a movie, and notice what's happened to your body. So are you clenching in your tummy? Where do you want to put your hand? Like, do you want to put your hand on your heart? Is your heart aching? And really lean into that emotion, and even starting to describe the things happening in your body on the page, I think might help you and lead you in the way that you want to go for that emotion. And the great thing is that we all experience emotions so differently that immediately you'll have more of a unique living, breathing person on the page if you can go back to the body. That's what we do as actors. You know, if it's coming out false and it's not feeling right, we take a minute and we go back to our bodies and then kind of try to work from there. And yeah, I think that works. I think that works for sort of actors at any age, because we're all writing things that we've never been through. And so, you know, how do you do that? And I think it's a combination of, that imagination, and it's like a muscle. Like Laura you can pop in now, right, when you need to. And if I've been writing a lot, I can. But when I get back to the page after a long break, I have to go right back to that same practice of like, okay, wait, where am I? What is happening? You know, and then kind of go back to the body and the breath too. Like, how am I breathing? You know, how's my heart? How fast is my heart going? All of that.
I love that. I liked referencing the body, but speaking of how's my breathing and how fast can we go, we are going to do a lightning round of 2 questions. So Nora S. from 5th grade, 5th grader in Alabama, asks us,
how do you have someone laugh while having them take your story seriously at the same time?
So we'll just lightning whip around. Aya, start us off.
Sure. I mean, I write a lot about racism, anti-Black racism, like the danger of white nationalism, and we have to laugh. Like, I think that in that taking something very seriously, there's a way that it's really important for me to have humor, but that humor is really punching up and punching back at the oppression.
Nikki, for you.
I laughed when I read this question because I'm like, I can't try to be funny. I'm not funny when I try to be funny. So I just have to be myself. And then somebody will read it and be like, oh, that's funny. And I'm like, you're welcome.
I often think, like, what's the most embarrassing thing that can happen to this character in this moment? And then I'm like, okay, that will just have to happen because that will give us moments of levity. How do you, and we have our 3rd question from a student. How do you start with your first character? From Joshua L., who's 7th grader in Massachusetts. Jennifer.
I do a character inventory. What does she keep under her bed? What does she keep in her nightstand? What's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to her? What's her favorite word? These things may never end up in the story, but I know them in my head, and then she becomes a richer character.
Yep, I do the same thing. What's their favorite food? What's the 3 things they would save in a fire? What do they want most, and what do they fear?
That's
most. What makes them most afraid, and what inspires them, and what terrifies them. And that's a good place to start.
All right, that is all our time for now. Thank you all to the panelists, and thank you everyone watching this for attending the Growing Pains Coming of Age and Emotional Storytelling panel at the Latinx Kidlit Books Festival. I hope you had a good time.
Thank you so